So you're dreaming of the day that you one day land your first instructional design role and you're wondering how you can excel in it. Or maybe you've just accepted your first ID job and you want to know how you can start off with success. Well, wherever you're at, I've got 5 valuable tips to help you thrive in your first instructional design role whenever that day comes for you. Hi, I'm Kristin, and I'm really excited to share some tips that'll help you set up for success in your first ID role. And even if that first ID job seems like it's super far away, it's never too early to start thinking like an instructional designer. And in all honesty, no two ID roles are exactly the same. Our industry is versatile, and so the rules for success are going to shift based on wherever you land. However, there are some universal tips that you can follow to make sure you thrive in any ID setting. When I got my first ID job, some of these tips I followed, and some of these tips I wish I followed because they would have made me feel even more successful. And so with that being said, follow these tips to make sure that you succeed in your first ID job, whether you're working for a corporation, a university, or your own business. So my first tip is to be receptive to feedback. And this is so important, especially as a new instructional designer, because you want to show that you are open to learning and hearing from other perspectives. Even the most seasoned instructional designers are still going to be receptive to feedback because they understand that feedback is vital for making sure that your work is refined and really great before you put it in front of learners. And you also have to think about the fact that there is so many things we have to consider as IDs. We have to make sure that our learning projects are not only digestible and accessible and engaging, but also that the visual design isn't distracting and that the learners can navigate through everything freely without getting stuck if it's an e-learning experience. So the more people that you can get it in front of, the better. And I understand that it might be kind of intimidating taking something and putting it in front of others to critique, but feedback is where you can learn, and it really is where all the magic happens. We have this great video on our channel from Sabrina where she talks about how she landed her first freelance ID client. And she talks about how she embraced feedback and really realized that the feedback process is where all of that teamwork happened. So be sure to check out that video to learn more about how Sabrina landed her first ID client and really enjoyed and learned from the feedback process. Now, in terms of being receptive to feedback, you want to make sure that you are actively seeking and incorporating feedback. So if you're on a team full of other IDs, making sure that you're getting feedback from them before you put it in front of a subject matter expert. If you are working for your own business, making sure that you are putting it in front of a subject matter expert and getting their input before you put that in front of the learners. And being receptive to feedback doesn't mean that you have to do everything that everybody suggests, but being open and really thinking about what they're suggesting can help you learn a lot. Now, the next thing to consider is that you don't want to take feedback personally. I know this can be hard, but you never want to think about, feedback for instructional design projects as something that is, attacking you personally, because oftentimes it's just feedback on how to improve the learning experience. And I know it can be easy to kind of take to heart. When I was a teacher, I feel like there were times where I got feedback that felt like a punch in the gut, but I've never experienced that as an instructional designer because I really understand how feedback can help you improve everything. And in all honesty, I approach feedback like I want it. If I am talking to other instructional designers, I will literally say, pick it apart. You're not going to hurt my feelings, because I want them to be open and honest and direct with me. I wouldn't say that to a subject matter expert, but I really am open and receptive to feedback because I understand that it's helping me learn too. So make sure that you are open and receptive to feedback to make sure that you're really making the most out of your projects and learning all that you can. And when talking about learning all that you can, that really brings me to my second tip. So you want to make sure that you are always considering the big picture when you're creating something. And that just means that you want to take time to understand how the learning solution you're creating aligns with the overall company or business goals. And that'll help you design and create something even more effectively. So when you are designing a learning solution, you really want to think about creating learning objectives that, at the end, when they are meeting those learning objectives, how are they going to perform better because of that? And then how is them performing better good for the business? If you can answer those questions, you're going to be able to design something even more effectively than you would if you couldn't answer those questions. So how do you learn, or how do you find out more about the big picture? You want to ask for resources when you can. So review organizational resources like org charts, certain descriptions or company data that might be really important. Even job descriptions might be helpful for some things. But anything that you can get your hands on to see the big picture, talking to key stakeholders is also important. And that leads me to my don't, because you don't want to skip opportunities to engage with key stakeholders that might help contribute to your learning experience. And so this is a big one for me, because when I got my first ID job, I remember there was one specific meeting that was optional, and it was bi-weekly, and a lot of big, intimidating key players were there. And I didn't often go because I wanted to focus on development. And I also didn't think I could add much or contribute. But the mistake I was making was that even though I couldn't provide a lot of value in those meetings, I could learn so much from those meetings because I could see how people were talking about the business goals and what was really important to them. And so once I realized I was missing out and started to attend those, I was really able to see how much bigger of an impact I could make in my courses because I knew more about the business. And that's what's really important. So speaking about impact, that brings me to my next tip. One way that you can show your impact is by tracking your progress. And this is going to look a little different for everyone, but what's most important is that you're tracking your output. So anything you're producing and the time that it takes you to produce that. That's really going to help you articulate your value, but it's also an opportunity to identify areas for improvement. So if you're tracking everything, maybe you're noticing that certain learning solutions take a longer time for you to develop. So maybe you pinpoint that as an area for improvement and track that over time. There's a lot of really cool opportunities, but what's most important is that you do track your progress. In my last video, I talked about how one of the biggest things I learned from switching from teaching to ID is that there's such a big shift on showing your impact with numbers and metrics. And again, that was a shift for me, but what's really important is that you are able to track that and showcase that. And for me, I found a project tracker really helpful. So make sure you use a project tracker to highlight your impact. I'll show you an example of that in just a moment, but what's most important with tracking your progress is make sure that you're regularly updating your project tracker. Every time you finish a project, make sure you're updating it. And this can help you no matter where you're at. If you are trying to get a promotion, it can help you with your impact, or contract renewals, or just simply resume revisions and updating your resume to show what you've done. There's a lot of great things you can do. So, how do you do it? Here's an example of a vague project tracker. These are some key areas that I suggest you track, but there are a lot of different things that you can add based off of what's most important for your role. So this one has the date, the project title, and the project goal, along with the actual format and the hours it took to develop, and at the end, if that goal was met. And these are super important for showing your impact, but there's lots of different things that you can add, like the amount of learners or the program or initiative it was for, the different types of technology you used. There's a lot of different things you can add, but you don't need to go overboard, but just think what's most important. What's most important for me to show, and that's what you want to keep track of. Now, let's talk don'ts. You don't want to wait until the last minute. Although it might seem like you've been super invested in this project and you're going to remember all the key points forever, you're not going to. The second you get immersed in the next project, you're going to forget a lot of things. And so don't miss out on the opportunity to track everything at the right time. You don't want to miss out on anything. So make sure that you're doing this regularly. Now, let's talk about another way to be successful. You want to make sure to be realistic with your promises and commitments, whether it's to your team or key stakeholders. You want to make sure that you're establishing clear expectations and effectively communicating with everyone, making sure everyone's on the same page to make sure that you're a credible and reliable source. And really what's most important here is don't make promises you can't keep. It can be really intimidating to want to overperform and people please, but what that can lead to if you aren't aware of what you can and can't do is not being credible and reliable, because you can't commit to what you're promising. And so what's really important is to understand your capabilities and constraints. So if you're on a team, making sure and talking with the team, establishing clear communication, understanding their processes, what they're able to do, what they're not able to do. And if you're working for your own business, taking the time to also understand your constraints and understand what you're able to do and not able to do, so you don't make promises that you can't commit to. So again, just don't make promises you can't keep. So don't promise outcomes or deliverables or say you're going to do something that are completely beyond your control or capacity. Making sure that you can do this can ensure that you stay credible and reliable for your team and your clients. Now let's get into my final tip. So you always want to make sure that you're making informed design decisions. And it's really important to incorporate things like learning science, visual design principles, user experience design principles when you can. Things like that are going to help you keep your focus on designing effective learning. And that is so important because it can be really easy to want to add this thing and that thing and really focus on adding all of the things to your learning solution to make it great. But what you also have to keep in mind is that your main goal as an instructional designer is to design things that help employees learn. And so oftentimes you want to make sure that you are being efficient and producing things quickly. And if you're sitting there and adding all of these extra things that don't necessarily matter, you're taking time away from those employees. So you want to make sure that you're prioritizing effectiveness over perfection. Make informed design decisions to really help you guide your process and steer away from things that are going to take additional time. So my don't is just don't waste time on things that are unnecessary. So resources and decisions that aren't necessary for enhancing that overall learning experience effectively. If they're able to meet the learning objectives and navigate through the experience and not be distracted by the visual design because the visual design is good, that's really important. And so it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be effective. So make sure to keep that in mind when you're designing things and maybe getting too caught up on making something look really pretty. I hope these tips helped you feel more confident and prepared to be successful at your first ID job whenever that day comes for you. And if you want to make sure that you're following all the steps necessary for upskilling and eventually landing that ID job, be sure to grab the free Become an ID checklist link below. And if you want to hear from others who have found success in our field, make sure to join us next Thursday, April 25th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, because we are hosting a live Q&A event with a panel of some former boot campers who have successfully landed instructional design roles. This is your opportunity to learn about their journeys and experiences firsthand, ask questions, and gain insights on how they landed their jobs. You can sign up for the event using the link below, and I hope to see you there.